3 days ago, Kazakhstan voted for a chamber that did not exist in this form a year earlier. On August 23, 2026, voters were asked to fill a newly established unicameral legislature, the Kurultai, created under a 2026 constitution that claimed to pull authority out of the presidential vertical. The contest was early. It followed a redesign sold as the answer to Bloody January, the 2022 unrest that cracked the old bargain between fuel prices, police, and the palace. Officials framed the day as a test of political pluralism in Central Asia's largest economy. The neighborhood offered few models for that test. Most of the world did not watch. The country is landlocked. It sits between Russia and China. Its planned capital is far from the sea lanes that usually define a power economy. Cameras, if they came at all, treated the day as regional pageantry, another constitutional shuffle after street violence. They missed the object under the map. Kazakhstan produces approximately 40% of the world's primary uranium. The number is not a metaphor. It is a share of extraction. The metal is not burned in Kazakh cities. It is not a unilateral monopoly locked in one ministry safe. It is pumped, dried, and sold through joint ventures with foreign state-backed firms. The host government still writes the terms of access. Nuclear power is baseload. A reactor already built wants fuel on a schedule measured in years, not news cycles. Uranium is the first physical input in that chain. When one country accounts for about 2/5 of primary supply, a ballot in Astana is not local color. It is a political lid on a choke point. The contradiction is simple. The state is trying to re-engineer who may speak inside the legislature while remaining landlord of the wells that keep other countries' nuclear fleets from starving. Pluralism, if it arrives, will arrive in a room that must still honor extraction contracts, regional elite bargains, and the appetites of Moscow, Beijing, and Western utilities. Either outcome leaves the same physical fact. The ore is here. The vote is here. The greed needs both to stay boring. They rarely stay boring together. Look at a map long enough, and Kazakhstan still refuses to behave like a fuel superpower. It has no ocean port of its own. Grain, oil, and metals move by rail, pipeline, and political permission. The Caspian is a closed sea. The shortest routes to customers run through neighbors who keep ledgers of their own. That geography should have made the country a price taker in every hard commodity. In uranium, the ground disagreed. The richest rolls sit in the Chu-Sarisu and Sirdarya basins, sandstone layers where the metal dissolved, migrated, and stalled in paleochannels. Soviet geologists mapped those roll fronts, while the Semily-Palatinsk polygon shook the northeast. Between 1949 and 1989, the testing ground absorbed hundreds of detonations. Villages downwind learned what a nuclear state costs. Mines in the south learned what it pays. After independence in 1991, the new republic inherited both ledgers, a wounded testing landscape and a set of deposits the Ministry of Medium Machine Building had already treated as strategic. What most outsiders still miss is not the Soviet scar. It is the method that turned a landlocked survey into a global tap. In sandstone of this type, you do not have to peel the desert open. You drill a pattern of wells. You inject a leaching solution into the aquifer that already holds the ore. You pull the pregnant liquid back up and strip the metal at the surface. In-Situ Recovery leaves no classic pit, no mountain of waste rock, and a cost curve that hard rock mines in Canada and Australia struggle to match. The desert looks empty because the work is underground and quiet. Quiet is not the same as small. Primary uranium is the raw stream, before secondary sources, government stockpiles, and underfeeding at enrichment plants confuse the ledger. When reactors in France, China, South Korea, and the United States schedule reloads, they are bidding, directly or through converters, into a market where this step supplies the largest single slice. Landlocked logistics still matter. Yellow cake leaves as drums and papers, not as tankers anyone can photograph from a beach. Custom stamps, rail gauges, and transshipment deals decide whether a pound is late. For decades, the political system that signed those stamps was built as a vertical. Nursultan Nazarbayev's long presidency treated the subsoil as a presidential resource. Regional bosses collected rents, the center collected loyalty. In January 2022, that bargain failed in public. A jump in liquefied petroleum gas prices, felt first in the West, became a nationwide rupture. Security forces fired. The Collective Security Treaty Organization sent troops at the government's request. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev used the shock to cut the old patron's remaining formal power and to promise a state that would no longer live inside one man's office. Constitutional amendments followed. The 2026 charter went further, replacing the familiar two-chamber design with a single Kurultai and advertising decentralization as the lesson of the blood. That is the historical blind spot. People who follow elections hear a story about pluralism in an authoritarian neighborhood. People who follow reactors hear a story about pounds in a tight fuel market. The same soil holds both. A legislature redesigned after street killings is now the venue that must live with wells already drilled into aquifers that other capitals cannot replace quickly. The 2022 dead did not die for uranium.
The 2026 chamber does not campaign as a mining board. The aquifer does not care which story the headline prefers.
The institution that turned those aquifers into a national instrument is National Atomic Company Kazatomprom. It was formed in 1997 as the state's answer to a post-Soviet mess of mines, mills, and export permits. The decision that still defines it was not a slogan about atoms for peace. It was an operating choice. Concentrate on in-situ recovery, treat the sandstone provinces as a factory floor, and refuse to wander into the expensive underground traditions that burden Western rivals. That choice produced a cost advantage you can measure in dollars per pound, not in press releases. While competitors sunk capital into deep shafts, mill rebuilds, and long permitting wars, Kazatomprom added well fields. Each new pattern looked like agriculture from the air: pipes, headers, a processing plant on the horizon. The psychology inside the company is the psychology of a landlord who knows the tenants have nowhere else to go at this scale. It does not need to own every reactor. It needs to remain the cheapest large tap. Ownership sits above the miners. Samruk-Kazyna, the sovereign wealth fund, holds the state's controlling stake and treats the atomic company as a cash engine among pipelines, rails, and grid assets. Dividends move from wellfield to fund to budget politics. In 2018, the company listed global depository receipts in London and shares on the Astana International Exchange, a dual signal. We will accept minority public capital, and we will not surrender the block that decides strategy. Foreign names arrive as partners, not landlords. Cameco brings Canadian minecraft and utility relationships. Orano brings French cycle knowledge and a home market of reactors that cannot bluff about fuel. Rosatom arrives with Russian conversion, enrichment, and a political weight no spreadsheet erases. China General Nuclear arrives with a build-out that turns uranium from a commodity into a planning assumption. Each of them wants pounds. Each of them accepts, because it must, that the Kazakh center decides the shape of the joint venture. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's incentive after 2022 was to keep that center intact while appearing to share it. He needed Western offtake to avoid looking like a client. He needed Russian and Chinese capital to avoid looking isolated. He needed Samruk-Kazyna solvent so that elite loyalty had a payroll. Regional bosses in Turkestan and Kızıl-Orda needed employment and quiet side rents. The company's managers needed production guidance that would not wreck the spot price they also helped set. Those motives do not announce themselves on a ballot. They show up as a signature block on a subsurface use contract, as a delay in a well-field permit, as a dividend target the fund will not miss. The people following the Kurultai for party lists are not the only faction in the room. The other faction already has keys to the pump houses. The hidden mechanism is not a secret map. It is a contract architecture that forces every serious foreign competitor into a marriage it cannot easily leave. Kazakhstan does not auction the best sandstone as a clean concession and walk away. The center invites you in, keeps a Kazatomprom subsidiary in the venture, and lets your capital pay for wells that will still sit under Kazakh law when your board changes. Inkai in the south binds Cameco to that pattern. Catco binds Orano. Russian structures linked to Rosatom and Uranium 1 take other blocks. Chinese vehicles tied to CGN take theirs. On paper, they are commercial partnerships. In practice, they are a diplomatic seating chart written in reserves. Watch how the money moves on a good year.
A joint company books the pounds. Costs stay low because the method is cheap and the deposit is already understood. Profit splits according to shareholding. The Kazakh side's take climbs into Kazatomprom, then into Samruk-Kazyna, then into the wider state. Foreign capital has funded the expansion. The sovereign fund books the political victory. No single partner can threaten to pick up the aquifer and leave. Cameco can sulk.
Orano can lobby Paris. Rosatom can mention transit and history. CGN can mention other mines in Namibia or domestic stockpiles. None of them can replace this volume on a short clock. That is the tightrope, and the center walks it on purpose. Give Russia too clean a sweep, and Western utilities treat the pounds as sanctioned risk. Give China too clean a sweep, and Moscow hears a vassal story it will not tolerate on its southern steppe. Give the Canadians and the French too much autonomy, and the narrative of sovereign control collapses at home. So the government keeps the board mixed. It renews subsurface rights in pieces. It lets production guidance rise when the spot price rewards it, and ease when flooding the market would punish the dividend. In a climactic season, the tension is not a movie raid. It is a committee. A well-fueled expansion waits on an environmental stamp. A Chinese partner wants a higher offtake share because new domestic reactors are hungry. A Russian partner wants payment routes that survive other countries' banks. A Western partner wants audit rights and an exit valuation that will not look like expropriation.
Regional officials want local hire quotas that raise costs. The atomic company wants a single production number it can defend to London listings and to the fund. Someone in the presidential administration wants no headline that says Kazakhstan picked a side. Then the political hardware changes. A unicameral Kurultai, sold as decentralization, enters a system whose most valuable product depends on central discipline. Mining oblasts suddenly have a louder legislative path. Deputies can discover that a joint venture's tax holiday is a campaign. They can discover that water used in leaching is a village grievance. They can discover that a Russian or Chinese board seat is a patriotic speech. Idealism says this is accountability. Reality says every extra veto is a delay measured against reload schedules in other countries. Ambition says the new chamber will civilize the resource state. Constraint says the resource state paid for the chamber. Dominoes are already on the table. If deputies from producing regions treat foreign partners as ATM machines, the cheapest pounds in the market become the most politically expensive.
If the center overrides the chamber to protect the contracts, pluralism looks like paint. If one flag is squeezed to please another, the seating chart becomes a grievance in two capitals at once. Nuclear demand does not pause for that argument. Life extensions, new builds, and governments hunting baseload without nightly gas anxiety all press on the same primary stream. The surge does not require a fantasy about a world made only of reactors. It requires only that existing fleets keep running, and that a few large builders keep pouring concrete. Each of those decisions lands, eventually, as a call for drums that started as liquid in a Kazakh well. Present tense, the wound is this. The 2026 design asks a young assembly to manage contracts that were written for a vertical state. Regional elite incentives, once handled with phone calls and transfers, now have a public microphone. Samruk-Kazyna still needs the cash. Cameco, Orano, Rosatom, and CGN still need the pounds. The aquifer still sits where it sat when the last constitution was paper. Barriers that used to break in a closed room now break or fail to break under lights.
No clean resolution arrives with the count of a single election. The partners remain inside the fence. The deputies remain hungry for a proof of independence. The wells keep humming in a language neither caucus fully speaks. That is not a metaphor for balance. It is a balance that can slip a few percent and still move the world price, still move a utilities fuel clause, still move a government story about energy security. The climax is administrative, which is why it is dangerous. Administrative failures do not look like explosions. They look like a permit that does not come, a partner that stops drilling, a fund that misses a transfer, a neighbor that notices first.
A power economy is not only banks and tickers. It is the dull physical fact that some rooms somewhere decide whether a reactor in another latitude gets its next core. Kazakhstan's new legislative form is one of those rooms now, whether the deputies like the job or not. The larger principle is colder than reform language. Political architecture can be rewritten in a season. Geology cannot. Joint venture share registers can be argued over. The cost curve of sandstone leaching does not attend hearings. A state may decentralize speeches and still be forced to centralize the one commodity other nations cannot substitute at scale. Or it may centralize the commodity so tightly that the speeches become a risk premium buyers add to every pound. Familiar life hides that choice. Lights stay on, fuel assemblies look like industrial pottery. Few voters in Almaty, and fewer in Chicago or Lyon, picture a header house on the Sirdarya drainage when they hear the word parliament. The aftertaste is the image that remains when the slogans dry. Night on the steppe. A grid of wellheads, small and repetitive, like a crop. Far to the north, a unicameral hall learning how to say no.
Between them, a sovereign fund counting a dividend that pays for a social peace the last uprising proved was not free. 4 foreign industrial flags share the same water table and pretend the arrangement is only commercial. It is commercial. It is also the way a landlocked country rents its location between empires without selling the ground outright. The Kurultai will be judged, in other capitals, less by its rhetoric than by whether those drums keep moving on time. That is an unfair test for a legislature born from a promise of voice. It is the test the fuel cycle will apply anyway. Intention can be pluralism. Outcome can be a more complicated desk for the same signatures. Allegation can dress a contract fight as sovereignty. Fact remains a share of primary extraction no other single border currently matches. Scenario is easy and cheap. A chamber that trips, a partner that freezes a project, a price spike that turns a distant assembly into a household word. Prediction is not required. The wells are already there. The assembly is already seated. The customers are already building their year on the assumption that this particular quiet continues. When a country tries to become more than a vertical while remaining the tap, who exactly is allowed to turn the valve?